In the absence of clergy, let us bow our heads in a moment of silent reflection or prayer. Reading of the journal.
In Senate, Wednesday, March 17, 2021, the Senate met pursuant to adjournment. Journal of Tuesday, March 16, 2021 was read and approved. On motion, Senate adjourned.
Without objection, this journal stands approved as read. Presentation of petitions. Messages from the Assembly. Messages from the governor. Secretary will read.
Senator Salazar moves to discharge from the Committee on Rules Assembly Bill number 2277A, substituted for the identical Senate Bill 2836, third reading calendar 555.
So ordered. Messages from the governor. Reports of standing committees. Report of select committees. Communications report from state officers. Motions and resolutions. Senator Gianaris.
Thank you, Madam President. Amendments are offered to the following third reading calendar bills. Senator Hoylman's bill, page 23, calendar 409, Senate 1957. And Senator Kaplan, page 34, calendar 597, Senate 5669.
The amendments were received, and the bill shall retain its place on the third reading calendar. Senator Gianaris.
Please take up the reading of the calendar this time.
The Secretary will read.
Calendar number 153, Senate Print 1378A by Senator Brooks, Act to amend the Real Property Tax Law.
There's a home rule message at the desk. Sorry. Read the last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect on the second day of January.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Ayes 55.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 203, Senate Print 161 by Senator Grenardez, concurrent resolution of the Senate and Assembly proposing an amendment to Section 6 of Article 5 of the Constitution.
Read the last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Ayes 55.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 205, Senate Print 436 by Senator Kaminsky, an act to amend the Civil Practice Law and Rules.
Read the last section.
Section 4, this act shall take effect on the 1st of November.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Announce the result. Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 205, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Griffo, O'Mara, Ort, Rath, and Sereno. Ayes 55, nays 5.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 435, Senate Print 1646 by Senator Skoufis, an act to amend the general municipal law.
Laid aside.
Calendar number 437, Senate Print 409 by Senator Biaggi, an act to amend the mental hygiene law.
Read the last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect on the 180th day of the shall become a law.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Ayes 60.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 448, Senate Print 4700 by Senator Gorin, an act to amend the Village of Upper Brookville to retroactively apply for a real property tax exemption.
Read the last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Senators voted in the negative are Senators Akshar, O'Mara, and Skoufis. Ayes 57, nays 3.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 507, Senate Print 4207 by Senator Adabo, an act to amend the mental hygiene law and the racing, parimutuel wagering, and breeding law.
Read the last section.
Section 3, this act shall take effect on the 60th day of the shall become a law.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Ayes 60.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 518, Senate Print 2969 by Senator Harcum, an act to amend the tax law.
Read the last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect July 1st, 2021.
Call the roll.
Adabo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ort, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 518, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Akshar and O'Mara, Ayes 58, nays 2.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 521, Senate Print 4670 by Senator Parker, an act to amend the tax law.
Read the last section.
Section 2, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Orr, Stewart-Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Ayes 60.
Bill is passed.
Calendar number 555, Assembly number 2277A by Assemblymember Aubrey, an act to amend the correction law.
Laid aside. Senator Gianaris, that completes the reading of today's calendar.
Can we now go to the reading of the controversial calendar, please?
The secretary will ring the bell.
Calendar order? Okay. Secretary will read.
Secretary will read.
Calendar number 435, Senate Print 1646 by Senator Skoufis, an act to amend the general municipal law.
Senator Lanza, why do you rise?
Madam President, I believe there's an amendment at the desk. I waive the reading of that amendment and ask that you recognize Senator Borrello to be heard.
Thank you, Senator Lanza. Upon review of the amendment in accordance with Rule 6, Section 4B, a rule is non-germane and out of order at this time.
I appeal the ruling of the chair and ask that Senator Borrello be recognized.
The appeal has been made and recognized, and Senator Borrello may be heard.
Thank you, Madam President. I believe this amendment is germane because this particular bill deals with how VFWs and other organizations, American Legion posts, have been harmed by the governor's erratic and unscientific executive orders. Therefore, this bill is there to try and help those folks offset some of those losses caused by the governor's unscientific way of handling these lockdowns. More importantly, we are seeing now, here we are, day 13, since the governor's powers were supposedly revoked. It kind of reminds me when I was a kid, hearing about the American hostages in Iran, how many days each day that they were held hostage in Iran. Well, here we are, day 13, still being held hostage by powers that were allegedly revoked nearly 2 weeks ago. But not only does it appear that these powers still exist, but the governor seems to be emboldened by them. As recently as yesterday, we saw the governor say, well, we're going to let some people, go past the 11 p.m. curfew, and the others, well, we'll see. He is clearly still using these powers to not only continue his lockdown and harm of our economy, but to create basically a diversion from the mounting scandals that we have seen. In order to really remedy this, this amendment needs to be taken up. We need to vote on it and pass it to truly strip the governor of those executive authority. So what else can we do now except notice that right now, the only changes that have happened in the last 13 days are the ones that the governor himself have brought forth. That's why this amendment is not only germane, but it's critical that it passes here today, so that this legislature can return to its constitutional obligation to be a separate, co-equal branch of government. So, Madam President, I respectfully ask that you find this amendment to be germane and pass it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I want to remind the House that the vote is on the procedures of the House and the ruling of the chair. Those in favor of overruling the chair signify by saying aye.
We have once again agreed to waive the showing of hands and record each member of the minority in the affirmative.
Without objection, so ordered. Announce the results.
Ayes 20.
The bill is passed.
No.
Sorry. 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 The ruling of the chair stands and the bill in chief is before the House. The secretary. Are there any other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing and hearing none, debate is closed. The secretary will ring the bell. Read the last section.
Section 3, this act shall take effect immediately.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Orr, Stewart-Cousins, White.
Announce the results.
Ayes 62.
The bill is passed.
Calendar number 550.
Go ahead.
Calendar number 555, Assembly number 2277A by Assemblymember Aubrey, an act to amend the correction law.
Senator Akshar.
Madam President, if you just give me 1 second, please. would yield for a few questions.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor will yield.
Thank you, Madam President. My question through you, Madam President, is do the terms solitary confinement and special housing unit mean the same thing to the sponsor?
Through you, Madam President, I'm not sure how Senator Akshar defines special housing unit. So if you could clarify, that would be helpful.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would give me a definition of a special housing unit in her mind and solitary confinement in her mind as well.
Through you, Madam President, the special housing unit, or SHU, is one form of solitary confinement that is used in DOCS facilities. Typically, it means being confined to a small space about the size of an elevator for 22 to 24 hours a day, given no meaningful interaction with other people. Currently under the law, there is not a limit to how long someone can be confined in SHU. It could be for months, years, in some cases even decades.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Will the sponsor yield? Sponsor yields.
Could the sponsor give me an example of someone who has languished in a special housing unit for years or even decades?
Madam President, there are about 4,000 people in segregated confinement in prisons and jails across New York State, including numerous people who are being held in SHU right now. For just one example, I recently visited Fishkill Correctional Facility in the Hudson Valley. While I was there, I visited SHU 200, where several men were being held in solitary. I don't feel that I need to name them, but I personally witnessed men being held in solitary confinement in SHU.
Through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
The sponsor just used the number 4,000. She was aware of 4,000 inmates who are currently being held in special housing units. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Where does the sponsor get that number of 4,000 from?
This is approximately 4,000 people who are being held right now. We know, for example, in 2019, through a report that was issued by the NYCLU, that in that year alone, more than 38,000 people were sent to solitary confinement in facilities across the state of New York. Additionally, DOCS actually, on a monthly basis, reports, while the data is limited, they do report the number of people who are being held in SHU on their website on a monthly basis.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Sponsor yield.
Yes.
The sponsor made
yields.
reference to, I think, NYCLU, and I'm sorry, it was what year? It was 2000 and, I'm sorry.
2019.
Okay. The question is, in 2019, I just want to make sure I understand this, Senator Salazar. In 2019, it is your assertion that some 31,000 people were sent to a special housing unit?
Through you, Madam President, it was more than 38,000 people who were sent to solitary confinement, and we don't know which types of solitary confinement. We know that that included SHU, but there are additional forms of solitary confinement that some of those 38,000 people were likely sent to instead.
through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield? The
Yes.
sponsor yields.
Two questions, if I may. The first, in 2019, again, some 38,000 people were sent to the sponsor is asserting, were sent to solitary confinement, as she describes. What was the total prison population during that period of time?
Through you, Madam President, I don't have the exact number of how many people were incarcerated in the state in 2019 readily available to me.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Does the sponsor know how many people are currently incarcerated today in the state prison system?
Through you, Madam President, today, in March of 2021, I'm told that there are approximately 31,000 people who are in DOCS facilities across the state.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor will continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Would the sponsor be so kind to look over her shoulder and ask her counsel how many people were incarcerated in 2019 in state correctional facilities?
Through you, Madam President, I think that what the senator is asking is about the number of people who were at any point in 2019 held in solitary confinement versus the total number of people who were in DOCS facilities in 2019. And so I want to be very clear that in the report that the NYCLU issued in 2019, they were referring to the number of times that people were sent to solitary confinement. Some of those people were likely sent to solitary more than once. And so that number of more than 38,000 times when people were sent to solitary confinement could include some of the people multiple times. And in fact, it almost certainly did.
And through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
That was the
Sponsor
point.
yields.
Was the point that I was trying to make, Senator Salazar. So this is we're talking now in terms of numbers, but it's your assertion that these were instances of people going to solitary confinement based on what the NICLU report said, not necessarily 38,000 separate state prisoners going to special housing units.
Through you, Madam President, that is correct, but this is separate from the fact that we know there are approximately, right now, 4,000 people in segregated confinement in prisons and jails across New York State.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
The sponsor made mention of several different types of solitary confinement. Would the sponsor be so kind to educate me on the different types of solitary confinement within the state prison system?
Madam President, this includes SHU, the Special Housing Unit, ADSEG, it includes Keep Lock in your own cell where you can be held for the same period of time, up to, well, under HALT it would be up to 17 hours a day. Currently there is not a limit on how long someone can be held in solitary confinement.
If the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Why would one find themselves in administrative segregation or in a keep lock situation?
Madam President, it is really at DOC's discretion right now. We know of instances where, of course, someone may be disciplined through the use of solitary confinement for committing a violent act, but additionally, people can be sent to solitary confinement for virtually any reason, for very minor infractions, such as putting up a photo of their family in their cell without permission, not putting their tray away properly. These sort of minor infractions can also have someone sent to solitary confinement.
If the sponsor continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Madam President. Where is solitary confinement defined? Where could I look to get that definition?
Madam President, there are competing definitions for what constitutes solitary confinement. We define it as forms of segregated confinement, where the person is separated from the general population and is held in isolation.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield? The
Yes.
sponsor yields.
Who is we? We define it as. Who is we? I'm sorry.
Madam President, in the bill, at the very beginning of the bill, it states that segregated confinement means the confinement of an inmate, and says any form of cell confinement for more than 17 hours a day, other than in a facility-wide emergency, of course, or for the purpose of providing medical or mental health treatment.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Let me ask the question a different way. Prior to authoring the statute, how was solitary confinement defined? Because much of this bill, and I'm going to get to my question in just a moment, much of this bill is being driven by this terminology, doing away with solitary confinement. So I'm curious to know, prior to this bill being authored, how was solitary confinement defined?
President, I would argue that solitary confinement was not clearly defined before this bill was introduced.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Or if the sponsor would be so kind just to walk me through the history of this HALT legislation.
Through you, Madam President, before this bill was introduced, there was a settlement agreement. In 2014, this bill was introduced to encompass some of the provisions of the settlement agreement, as well as to expand and to codify the provisions of the settlement.
Sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
The sponsor is familiar with the people via Nucci. I think that's what she's describing in terms of the settlement. Is that accurate? If the sponsor would continue to yield, Madam President.
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
And what specifically came of that class action lawsuit by NYCLU in regards to the people via Nucci?
Through you, Madam President, the NYCLU settlement resulted in the implementation of policies which minimized the use and duration of confinement in SHU specifically, although not in other forms of solitary confinement. It created sanction guidelines, it ended the use of solitary only on juveniles. It instituted a presumption against solitary for pregnant people who are incarcerated and provided for alternative placement for people with cognitive impairment. However, the settlement agreement, of course, did not enact into statute laws to incorporate its provisions.
If the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
At the time, NYCLU said of the settlement that it was a comprehensive overhaul of the system. Does the sponsor agree with that assertion?
Madam President, I do not believe that the settlement was a comprehensive overhaul. I do believe that it made some progress, but the reason that we are voting on this bill today and why I support this bill becoming law is because I think that this is actually what is necessary in order to address the very serious problems with the use of solitary confinement in New York.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
An inmate that finds themselves in a special housing unit or a SHU, do you consider them to be in solitary confinement?
For you, Madam President, yes, I do.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Do those individuals have human contact?
Through you, Madam President, someone who is held in SHU does have minimal human contact, although under current law, prior to the passage of this bill, under current law, someone can be held in SHU for up to 23 hours a day, more than 17 hours a day, and without any meaningful human contact.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield,
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
are they able to have their property?
Madam President, it is actually at the discretion of docs whether or not someone who is held in SHU can have their property. They are not required to give them their property while they are held in solitary confinement.
Are they allowed to have,
Senator Akshar, are you asking the sponsor to yield?
I am, Madam President.
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
In the interest of time, I'm just going to ask about several things that inmates are allowed to have, and maybe I could just get a yes or a no, or we could discuss them individually. Personal visits, legal visits, radios, televisions, commissary privileges, the same meals as inmates in general population, playing cards, books, photographs, tablets, religious material, mental health assessments, packages, mail, legal mail, daily medical sick calls and emergency sick calls, general library services and the law library services, amongst others. Do people in a special housing unit have access to those things?
Through you, Madam President, these are privileges that someone who is held in SHU or solitary confinement could have access to, but it is at the discretion of docs. Any of these privileges under current law can be taken away from someone. They can be held without access to these privileges.
Through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm having a difficult time making the delineation between a special housing unit and solitary confinement. So could the sponsor just help me through this issue? I am calling the folks that find themselves to be with poor behavior, incorrigible, who find themselves in this situation in a special housing unit, Keep Lock or ADSEG. How does that differ from what the sponsor is describing as solitary confinement?
President, it is not. All of these are forms of what I would consider to be and what the bill treats as solitary confinement.
Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
How does the current law address these issues surrounding special housing units?
Through you, Madam President, I'm a little unclear on which issues Senator Akshar is referring to.
Okay. Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Try it a different way. It's my understanding that there was an agreement last year between the governor and the legislature in reference to dealing with inmates, both in state facilities and county facilities, who find themselves residing in a special housing unit, AGSEG, Keep Lock. How does that agreement of 2019 differ from what we're currently doing by way of the bill in chief?
Madam President, the agreement and the regulations that were adopted when the agreement was reached in 2019 do include some of the key points outlined in this bill, but they are not statutory mandates. They fall short in many areas, one of which, one difference between the regulatory agreement in this bill is that this bill clearly defines segregated confinement, also regulates and prevents the prolonged use of solitary confinement in Keep Lock in one cell, in administrative segregation, or protective custody. It also is necessary to prevent alternatives to SHU from becoming the new prolonged solitary confinement. Additionally, this bill specifically includes special populations and expands that definition to include people up to 21 years of age or over the age of 55, and in order to further protect vulnerable populations that were not protected by the regulations.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
In reference to the agreement that was reached in 2019, who was part and parcel to that discussion, and how did you all arrive at the parameters of that agreement?
Through you, Madam President, it was based on a proposal from the executive and negotiations between the executive and the two houses of the legislature.
Sponsor continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
These were regulations, not laws, is that correct?
Madam President, yes, that is correct.
The sponsor will continue to yield, Madam President.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Were those regulations crafted by those who would be considered experts in the field of corrections, who understand the complexities of running facilities like jails or prisons, or were they created by bureaucrats in Albany?
Madam President, these regulations were not created. These regulations, first of all, I was not directly involved in the process of creating these regulations. They are informed by a number of things, but most importantly, those regulations are not actually the basis of what we are doing today. What we are doing today and what is outlined in the solitary confinement bill is based on research. We have data. There is well-documented information about the impacts and the negative impacts of the long-term use of solitary confinement, and that is the basis for the changes in this bill.
Sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Just based off of something that you just said, so the question is, who did you in fact consult with in regards to authoring this legislation?
Through you, Madam President, those who authored this legislation consulted with people who do have experience working within the system of mass incarceration. They consulted with, and I consulted with, as the sponsor of this bill, many people who have been directly impacted by the use of solitary confinement, as well as what you could call stakeholders, people who work in correctional facilities in New York.
Continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Sponsor care just to share who some of those people who work in correctional facilities were that she spoke to?
Madam President, this included speaking to corrections officers about the bill.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Just want to make sure I understand the last point. So you sought the advice of members of NYSCOBA in authoring this legislation in terms of, arriving at whatever language it is that we're discussing today?
Madam President, I did not personally draft this legislation. I'm the sponsor of this legislation, but this legislation precedes me and my time in the Senate. But I do know for a fact that I met with corrections officers, with union representatives. I met with people who work for docs, and I spoke to docs about this bill.
Sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Reference specifically to the folks that are working within the confines of correctional facilities that you have spoken to, are they in favor or support of this language?
Madam President, no, they are not.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
State correctional facilities, there are what is known as inmate liaisons. Have you spoken to any inmate liaisons in reference to this language?
Spoken to inmate liaisons about the content of this bill, although I have spoken to many people who have either experienced solitary confinement firsthand or whose family members have, as well as the families of people who have died in solitary confinement in our state, many people who have been directly impacted by the use of solitary confinement.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
How many people have died while in solitary confinement in the last decade?
Through you, Madam President, we don't have the number of people who have died in solitary confinement in the past decade readily available to us. I would argue, however, that even one person dying while held in solitary confinement for preventable causes is too many.
For the record, I would agree with the sponsor. If the sponsor would be so kind to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Senator, I think you may have mentioned this, and obviously you and I have had this discussion about you traveling the state, visiting correctional facilities. Have you had the opportunity to visit a SHU?
President, yes, I did have the opportunity to visit SHU as recently as last month.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
What was the sponsor's overall perception of that visit, the conditions? If the sponsor would be so kind, if she would just share what it was that she observed or witnessed while she was there.
Through you, Madam President, while I was visiting, most recently when visiting Fishkill Correctional Facility, I did go to the SHU. I saw several men who were being held in solitary confinement there. I spoke to them. One of them, for example, was very distressed. He had been held in there for longer than 15 days, and that was actually confirmed to me by corrections officers. He also mentioned that he didn't have his property with him. I also had the opportunity while there to go into one of the cells in the special housing unit and see the size, that it's a small cell, and also see the very small space that is used for people who are being held in SHU to have some out-of-cell time while they're in SHU, and it is roughly the size of a fire escape.
Through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
In the discussion with that particular inmate who was being held longer than 15 days and did not have I'm assuming him, if I'm wrong, just let me know. If you care to elaborate, did he fill you in as to why he found himself in a special housing unit in the first place and why he did not have his property?
Through you, Madam President, while I did speak to the man who was incarcerated, I also spoke to corrections officers who were there with us, and they confirmed for me that actually in this particular case, the man was being held because he had not taken a COVID test, and he had been exposed to COVID-19. Typically, that means that someone would only be quarantined for 2 weeks. In this case, the reason that he was held longer was because apparently during his brief out-of-cell time at the end of that 14 days of quarantine period, he was exposed again. He still didn't test positive for COVID-19. He wasn't tested, but he was returned immediately that same day to SHU, and so it essentially restarted the clock on his time in SHU.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
So in this
The
particular, I'm sorry.
sponsor yields.
I'm sorry, Madam President. So in this particular instance, this inmate was not being held in a special housing unit for behavioral issues. He was being housed because of COVID-related issues.
Through you, Madam President, it's possible that originally he was held for disciplinary reasons. I cannot confirm that. I do know that people are currently being held in SHU not only for disciplinary reasons, but also for the purpose of public health, of trying to manage the spread of COVID-19 in correctional facilities.
Madam President, through you, the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Two parts. What were the lighting conditions like when you were in the special housing unit? And did you witness any interactions between the inmates and someone providing service, mental health, substance use disorder, whatever it may be, or any interactions between those inmates and corrections officers?
Madam President, I did not get to witness any of the incarcerated people engaging in programming at all during my visit. I was at Fishkill for about 4 hours, and there was not any programming that I could see available to the people held in SHU during that time.
And through you, if the sponsor would yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Do those inmates who find themselves in a special housing unit, are they afforded an opportunity to get some of those services that you and I are discussing?
Madam President, currently they are not required under the law to be provided with access to the programs that are available to the general population in DOCS facilities.
President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Madam President. What about the agreement that was reached between the governor and the legislature? Are they afforded an opportunity to have access to those services?
Madam President, under the regulations, out-of-cell time, including programming, is still at the discretion of DOCS, as opposed to in this bill, where the access to out-of-cell programming is required.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Wait, please allow Senator Akshar to continue, but I do want to point out to him that his 30-minute limit is surpassed, but we're happy to allow him to continue on the debate.
Thank you, Senator Gineris.
Thank you. Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Madam President, through you, I just want to discuss, in reference to the bill in chief, the age requirements or the special category of people who will no longer be able to go into a special housing unit. If you'd be so kind, how did we arrive at those ages, 21 and 55 respectively?
Madam President, it is well documented that people in these age groups, young people 21 years of age or younger, people who are 55 years of age or older, are particularly vulnerable to the detrimental impacts of long-term solitary confinement.
Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Could we agree that those under the 21 years of age or younger or 55 years of age or older are still capable of creating chaos and wreaking havoc within the confines of a correctional facility?
Madam President, yes, certainly. This bill does not assume that people in the special populations, even including pregnant people who are included in the special populations under this bill, are incapable of committing violence or doing something that would require separation from the general population. Under this bill, they would still be able to be separated from the general population. They just would not be able to, would not be held in the isolation that comes with solitary confinement in the SHU.
If the sponsor would continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So in regard to this particular point, if you just describe what would happen to someone if they were 20 years old and committed an offense that is captured within Part K of the statute.
Madam President, they would be separated from the general population. They would be sent to what is referred to as RRU, a residential rehabilitation unit, and it would be used for therapy, treatment, rehabilitative programming that would be available to them. And they also would be required to have out of cell time that they wouldn't otherwise have in SHU, 7 hours total of out of cell time per day.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Within this statute, if one commits one of those offenses in Part K, and it is determined that he, I'm just going to use he in this instance if you're okay with that, must be placed in a special housing unit, for how long, if I commit one of those offenses and I'm sent to the SHU, for how long can I go?
Someone could be held in SHU for up to 15 days if they are not included in the special populations. After that point, if they are held for 15 days, they would then need to be put instead in an RRU if they were going to continue to be separated from the general population.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So if my behavior did not improve during those 15 days under this statute that we're debating today, it would be up to the folks within the correctional facility to determine whether I would go back to general population or I would go to a residential rehabilitation unit?
Through you, Madam President, yes.
If, Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
If the determination was made that I could go back to general population, and then that very same day I reoffended, what would happen to me?
Through you, Madam President, at the discretion of docs, the person could be separated once again immediately from the general population and could be put in an RRU.
And through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So doc has the ability to send me back to the SHU after that 15-day period?
Madam President, rather the person would, in this particular case, because they had just spent 15 consecutive days in SHU, they would instead be put in an RRU.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So the longest amount of time that I can spend in a special housing unit based on the language of this statute is no more than 15 days.
Madam President, once you are returned to the general population, you could potentially go back to the SHU as long as you are not included in these special populations and as long as it is not determined that it is unsafe or to the detriment of the person's health for them to return to SHU.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
For how long?
Madam President, so up to 15 days is how long they could be held in SHU specifically. However, after that 15 days, even whether this is the first time that they've been in SHU or if they previously at some point had been held in SHU. After 15 days, they need to be transferred either back to general population if it's appropriate or to an RRU.
President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is there a time limit within a specified time frame that an inmate can go to a special housing unit?
Madam President, the bill, I think, is clear in stating that the longest time that someone can be held in a special housing unit is 15 days. Additionally, 20 days within a 60-day period, but they also can potentially be held in an RRU, and there is not a hard limit on the amount of time that someone could potentially be held in an RRU. It would likely be up to a year, but even after spending a year in the RRU, if docs determined that someone needed to, for any serious reason, or if they posed a threat to their own safety or to the safety of someone else in the facility, they could even continue to be held in RRU and at doc's discretion potentially have restrictions imposed.
If the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So an inmate cannot be placed in a special housing unit any more than 20 days in a 60-day period.
Madam President, yes.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
In this same hypothetical, if I had met that 20-day period in a 60-day time frame, and it was the decision to send me to an RRU, and I too was creating issues within that residential rehabilitation unit, what recourse does the Department of Corrections then have? Since I've met, I can't be sent to a special housing unit because I've already made that 20-day time frame. I've not been able to behave in a residential rehabilitation unit. So what recourse do corrections officers and those that run the facilities have then to deal with me?
Madam President, there are still other means of discipline that are available at the discretion of docs under this bill. Passing this bill would not prohibit these other means of discipline. It could mean official reprimand, imposition of work assignments, suspending privileges, suspending visitation, loss of commissary, withholding of packages. All of these things could still be used as a means of discipline under this bill. And additionally, safety precautions can be taken if someone continues to be a threat to the safety of themselves or others while they are held in RRU.
Just on the bill for just a moment.
Senator Akshar on the bill.
While I respect the position of my colleague, I think the point I'm trying to make is that if someone was prone to committing violent assaults or was a sexual predator within the confines of a correctional facility, and they exist, they prey on the weak, and we are limiting the amount of time that we can put someone in a special housing unit, I think actually we're doing a disservice to the other people who find themselves incarcerated. Would the sponsor continue to yield for a question?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
If we could look at page 5 of the bill, lines 31 and 32, it says specifically, and I'll read if that's okay while you're looking for it. The department shall not impose restricted diets or any other change in diet as a form of punishment. Is it the sponsor's assertion that this is currently taking place?
Through you, Madam President, the purpose of including this is to ensure, to codify the provision that it will not take place, that someone will not be punished through changes in their diet, including depriving them of food.
Madam President, through you, I'm just going to ask just a couple more questions, if that'd be okay.
Does the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
Just have a question specifically about the evidentiary hearings. Can the sponsor just walk me through that process when those evidentiary hearings take place?
Madam President, under this bill, if someone could be held in keep lock immediately for up to 48 hours, but before being placed in SHU, they would need to have a due process hearing, a disciplinary hearing, in order to determine whether or not it's justified to place them in SHU.
Two last questions, if the sponsor be so kind. to
Does the
yield.
sponsor yield? The
Yes.
sponsor yields.
Page 8, line 33 through 46 talks specifically about the training that is associated with this particular statute. Who is going to be developing that training? Who's setting the curriculum, and who will be teaching that?
President Dox will.
Thank you. And Madam President, sponsor, continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Page 9, lines 9 through 18. I just want to talk about this for just a moment. In the second sentence, it was talking about de-escalation, intervention, informational reports shall be the preferred methods of responding to misbehavior. So do those within a correctional facility still have this discretion? Can they use their discretion in terms of trying to figure out what is best for the safety of not only the other inmates, but the inmate in question, the facility, the corrections officers, so on and so forth? Does this section of the law still allow for discretion?
Madam President, yes. This section of the bill does still allow for docs to use discretion in determining whether someone needs to be continue to be separated, and whether they are held in SHU or transferred to RRU.
Madam President, on the bill.
Senator Akshar on the bill.
I want to thank Senator Salazar for taking some time and her indulgence in answering my questions. I think it was a spirited debate. Many of you know that my previous employ, I was a member of law enforcement. I guess I had the unfortunate opportunity of seeing the commission of crime and the havoc that crime has created for so many people. My opposition to this bill, I think this is important for me to say, Madam President, is not for a lack of compassion. It is not because I do not believe in rehabilitation or this issue of reentry. To the contrary, I agree with it very much. And I think, regardless of our politics, at the end of the day, it should be the collective wisdom of this body to reduce recidivism to the greatest extent that we possibly can. This bill, for me, it seems dangerous that we would handcuff, no pun intended, the men and women who are working within the confines of correctional facilities and taking discretion away from them. I mean, we heard today that regardless of what it is that I do while incarcerated, regardless of how incorrigible I am or how much havoc I create, the most that the facility can do is put me in a special housing unit for no more than 20 days within a 60-day period. I actually am in favor of these residential rehabilitation units. I think they have the potential of serving a great purpose. And at the end of the day, for me, again, this is not about not caring or not being compassionate. I'm just trying to look at things pragmatically and be measured and ensure that we are balancing the needs of people who find themselves incarcerated, but we're also balancing the needs of others, including our corrections officers who have a thankless job. And I think one last point I will make is that I think this issue of solitary confinement has really been sensationalized, or some would have the general public believe that a special housing unit is like what Andy Dufresne was sent to in The Shawshank Redemption. And that's not necessarily the case. So the sponsor has had an opportunity to tour Fishkill. I've had an opportunity to tour Southport and witness for myself what that facility was like. And it is the furthest thing from what we have seen in Hollywood-produced movies. So it is for those reasons and others that I cannot and will not in good conscience when it comes time to vote be able to support this bill. Madam President, again, I thank you for your indulgence and my thanks again to Senator Salazar.
Senator Steck.
Good morning, Madam President. Would the sponsor yield, please?
Does the sponsor yield? The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator. Do you personally, in your prior experience before becoming a senator, do you have professional experience working in corrections, either in a corrections facility or with other groups that are directly involved in our corrections process?
Through you, Madam President, I did not previously work in corrections before becoming a senator.
Again, if the sponsor would yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Senator. Generally speaking, today, if you could describe your understanding of what the situation would be and the process would be for somebody that's in general population to find themselves relocated to a special housing unit. What would they have to do, and what's the process?
Through you, Madam President, under the current law, someone can be placed in a special housing unit in SHU for at the discretion of DOCS, and they could be placed for a number of reasons, ranging from a very minor infraction, what I think any of us would consider to be a very minor infraction that doesn't impact other people in the facility, to more serious infractions such as assaulting an officer or being involved in violence.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
You said assigned by DOCS. A correction officer on the block decides I've had it with this guy, I'm putting him in SHU, or if you could elaborate on your understanding of the process.
Through you, Madam President, under current law, someone can be sent to SHU at the discretion of the people in the facility, of a corrections officer. They can be sent to SHU, and they do not need to have a disciplinary hearing as would be required under this bill. Under current law, they're not required to have a disciplinary in the 15 days that they could potentially be held in SHU.
If the sponsor would continue to yield, Madam President.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Senator. So just so I'm clear, are you saying that right now, for an incident either of little severity or significant severity, an individual correction officer could say, I'm relocating you to a special housing unit, and that's the end of it, that there's no hearing at all, there's no hearing officer that is involved at all in any of our facilities?
Madam President, currently it is at the CO's discretion whether or not someone can be sent to SHU as a means of discipline.
Madam President, what if the sponsor would continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
I apologize, I'm not trying to be difficult. So you're saying that an incident happens, and an individual corrections officer, brand new on the job, can say, I've had it, this guy's going to go to special housing unit, and he could be there for 15 or 20 days? All by himself, one corrections officer?
Through you, Madam President, COs are hypothetically following the DOC's regulations, and yes, it is at the discretion of an individual officer in these cases.
Sponsor would yield, please.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. Is the sponsor aware of any trends in our prison over the last 7 or 8 years as far as violence on corrections officers? Is it an upward trend, a downward trend? Has it been generally steady?
Madam President, I wouldn't be able to characterize whether there is an upward or a downward trend in assaults on corrections officers in New York. What I will say is that in other jurisdictions, in fact, in every other jurisdiction where they have limited or eliminated the use of long-term solitary confinement, they have seen a decrease in violence in the facility, including violence committed against corrections officers.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield, please.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Senator, would it surprise you to learn that in 2013 there were 645 assaults against officers in New York corrections facilities, and in 2020 that number jumped to 1,050?
Madam President, I'm not necessarily surprised by this information. I think that we need to take any violence that occurs in correctional facilities seriously, and it is part of what motivates me to support this bill based on the evidence that we've seen that limiting the use of solitary confinement and reducing it is consistent with reductions in violence.
Madam President, through you, if the sponsor would please yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Senator Salazar. Step-down units. There are units where inmates go under current regulations when they've completed their time in a special housing unit but are still too dangerous to be placed back in general population. In these step-down units, the inmates receive more programming than they did in SHU, but they are still subject to stricter safety measures than in the general population, which is important. HALT would provide no such units. The RRUs contemplated by HALT are not step-down units. So how would they plan to deal with an inmate who is not ready to be returned to the general population?
Through you, Madam President, actually, the bill does not specify that the existing step-down units in DOC's facilities could not actually be used as RRU. These same units could be used as residential rehabilitative units. It is about the amount of out-of-cell time, at least 7 hours of out-of-cell time that someone would be provided if they are in RRU, as well as access to programming, including there are about 99 different programs currently offered by DOCs. Many of those wouldn't likely be available to someone who is an RRU, but many would. These are programs such as seeking to reduce violence, anger management, mental health programs, different rehabilitative programs that DOCS currently offers.
President, if the sponsor would continue to please yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The
Thank you.
sponsor yields.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator. Under HALT, an inmate can be sent back to the general population without having to complete the necessary programming that they were receiving in the special housing unit. If the purpose of this type of program is to rehabilitate an inmate, shouldn't the inmate be required to complete the training?
Madam President, the purpose of the programming is to rehabilitate, to address behaviors that may have led someone to end up in SHU in the first place and then to be separated from the general population in RRU. the purpose here is actually to give more access to these programs, because under current law and regulation, DOCS is not required to provide these programs to people while they're incarcerated.
And through you, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. HALT requires a great deal more of congregate setting programs than what currently exists. Will there be additional staff positions created to handle these congregate situations similar to the RRUs?
Through you, Madam President, DOCS, under this bill, will be able to develop programming and hire additional staff as necessary.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. HALT also requires programming 7 days a week. How are we going to staff this kind of initiative?
Currently, DOCS already provides staff 7 days a week. We also are, in the One House budget, for example, we have designated additional funds for the implementation of HALT, and that can include ensuring that the facilities can provide the programming that is required under this bill, although I would note that DOCS does currently have a budget of more than $3 billion. I would argue that DOCS has the existing resources to provide this programming to people while they're being held in RRUs.
Madam President, the sponsor would continue to yield, please.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. Senator, it's my understanding in the One House budget resolution, you set aside $100 million towards HALT and these programs. Is that a one-shot, or is that going to be an annual recurring level of funding that the state taxpayers are going to have to foot, please?
You, Madam President, the funding that was included in the One House budget for the implementation of HALT is for the first round, or rather the first year of implementation. I would also note that while the size of the projected savings varies, it is not disputed, and DOCS does not dispute that in the long term, and not even very long, like in a matter of years, we would see a cost savings to DOCS and to local facilities through the implementation of HALT.
Madam President, the sponsor would please continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Madam President. The beginning of the bill, it defines the people that will not be eligible for HALT are people of the age 21, among other things, 21 years of age and younger, and 55 years and older. What is the science behind picking 21 and 55? It's been my experience that a lot of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are very dangerous, and frankly, at 52, I feel like I could still be a little danger in 3 years. So if you could, how did we come up with those ages?
It is well documented. For example, there was a report from 2006 from a law journal that states that there are very serious impacts on any individual, regardless of their age, of long-term solitary confinement, but that these special populations, younger people, people over the age of 55, for them, the impact is exacerbated. For example, for older adults, depriving them of auditory and visual stimuli can worsen existing confusion, memory loss. It exaggerates isolation. Studies have shown that it actually worsens heart disease and can lead to premature death.
Continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Senator. I'm not quite ready to move off of the age thing. Most children understand consequences to their actions. certainly I believe most adults do. If you're younger than 20, 21 or younger, or you're 55 or older, you're not, this is not a tool for you. There's no consequences to the bad behavior at 20 years old than at somebody that's 22 years old. So how doesn't that increase the safety risk to have people walking around with two different sets of rules where one person can instigate and face a consequence, but another person could be involved and instigate and not face consequences?
President, in the cases where the person, the individual in question, is violent or has demonstrated that they are a safety risk in the facility, they can absolutely still be separated from the general population, even if they are included in these special populations, whether it's a young person, 21 years or younger, or 55 years of age or older. The problem is that while someone, of course, should still face consequences if they commit an act of violence, for example, it would not be appropriate to harm their health. We know that the use of solitary confinement has had a very detrimental impact on not only people's mental well-being, but also on their physical well-being, and that should not be a consequence of someone committing an infraction while incarcerated.
President, the sponsor would yield for just a couple more questions, please.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator. I think this question may have been asked before, but I want to make sure that we are all clear on the answer. What is the level of involvement in the development of this legislation from the Department of Corrections, and has the Department of Corrections endorsed this bill, or do they support it?
Through you, Madam President, DOCS was very involved in the regulations that were put in place. However, DOCS was not directly involved in drafting this bill, which wouldn't be typical. They haven't endorsed this bill.
Yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. Does the Department of Corrections oppose this bill?
Through you, Madam President, DOCS does not take a position on this bill.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, if the sponsor would yield, please.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. Similarly, previously you were asked about, and you'd said that you'd spoken with corrections officers and staff, of course, many of which are members to the various labor unions. But have you talked to union leadership? Obviously, you talk to an individual correction officer. He or she has their own experience and their own opinion. But certainly, the leadership speaks for, and with authority and knowledge and experience, the group as a whole. So what contact and what level of support have you received from NYSCOBA?
Through you, Madam President, I have spoken to representatives from NYSCOBA, also AFSCME, PEF, the unions whose members include corrections officers in these facilities.
Madam President, if the sponsor would continue to yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I heard an answer to my question. Have you spoken with leadership from NYSCOBA, Council 82, and PEF, and are they supportive of this bill?
Madam President, they have not expressed support for this bill, but I did speak to them about the provisions of the bill at length.
All right, Madam President, if the sponsor would yield for a couple more questions.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
Are you aware that NYSCOBA and PEF are opposed to this bill, have issued memos of opposition?
Yes.
All right, thank you. One final question, Madam President, if the sponsor would yield.
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Appreciate your time, Senator Salazar, today, and your candor, and the spirit of where you're coming from, your heart in the matter. I truly do. I guess the purpose of the questions I've asked is the driving point that I'm trying to get at now is, and I have my own answer to the question. I suspect your answer is going to be a little different than mine, but should we really be substituting our judgment and authority in an area of expertise that, that we haven't fully been on the same page with and hasn't been shared and developed with the people that work this every day, the corrections officers, the staff, the Department of Corrections that have the knowledge, have the history, know how we got here, why we got here. Should we be substituting our judgment for their experience?
Through you, Madam President, this experience has actually not informed the current use of solitary confinement under the law. And what has informed this bill is the expertise of medical professionals who attest that the use of solitary confinement is harmful. The United Nations, who considers the use of long-term solitary confinement, isolation for longer than 15 days to be torture. This is what has informed the provisions in this bill, in addition to numerous studies, research that demonstrates not only the detrimental impact of the use of solitary confinement, but on the flip side, the benefits of using instead alternatives to solitary confinement when someone needs to be separated from the general population.
Thank you, Senator Salazar. On the bill, please, Madam President.
Senator Steck on the bill.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Again, I appreciate Senator Salazar's effort and her passion and her perspective on this, as well as her time and answering my questions today. I have visited many, in my Senate district, there are many corrections facilities run by the state of New York, run by the Department of Corrections. I visited almost all of them, and I visited most of them on numerous occasions. I've seen special housing units, I've seen the medical units, I've seen the general population, I've seen these prisons. I've talked to a lot of members of PEF and members of Council 82 and members of NYSCOPE, and I've talked to the superintendents. Now, I mentioned before on the floor, and I go back to it quite often. The older I get, the more I go back to it. Maybe I'm enjoying looking at my youth, but in my past, I spent 8 years in the United States Navy. And I was an engineer working in a nuclear power plant. And let me tell you, the last thing I wanted to see when I walked through the door into the control room to take over the watch was a bunch of people mashing buttons and twisting valves and turning knobs. They had too many things going on, and the plant wasn't steadied out. And that's a really good way. That's the last time that you want to make additional changes. We have regulations that have been put in place 3 months ago in these facilities that address a lot of what this bill is aimed at. We've also got COVID and struggling with protective equipment and vaccines and segregating those that are COVID positive with those that are suspected positive. And there's limited transportation. We're changing all the criminal justice rules. We're emptying out our prison population. There's just so much going on in corrections right now that it reminds me of walking into that nuclear power plant's control room and saying, the last thing we need to do here is add more variables because it's going to get more dangerous. So I see parallels there. One of my colleagues brought this up before, but I think it's important to bring up on the bill. Current regulations in the special housing units, these inmates have access to mental health counseling, they have unlimited access to legal counsel, they get their mail, they have access to their health care, they have books, they have playing cards, they have their tablets, they have most of the comforts, if you will, of the general population. They eat the same food as the general population. They get the phone, they get the radio. In fact, in my visits, corrections officers had told me that in many instances, people leaving the special housing unit will seek an infraction immediately after being left out of the special housing unit to go back into the special housing unit. It's a phenomenon that I think would surprise many. So anyways, I've been in a lot of these facilities. None of us want to spend any more time in there than we have to. There are people though that go there, they make their family's livelihood working there, and they're concerned about their own health and their own safety. But in visiting these facilities, I'll tell you this isn't Papillon, and this isn't Devil's Island. when I was in the Navy, there were 12 of us in a room that's about 12 feet wide by 20 feet long, 12 of us. Prisoners today, and it struck me at the time, and I had no idea at the time that I was going to be a state legislator talking about this today, but it struck me odd at the time that in the noblest of callings, serving your country in the military, that these guys volunteered, and they had less personal space and less room for gear, and frankly, 25 years ago, a lot less access to the outside world when at sea than the people that have preyed on society and caused society angst and the taxpayer angst and have victims out there are getting better treatment and more space and more creature comforts today than sailors that I served with 25 years ago. My concern is about safety. Safety of our officers, safety of our staff, safety of the inmates. I understand it. There are people too. Most of them have people out there that love them. They're somebody's kid. They're human beings. They deserve to be treated reasonably and fairly. And that means that they got to worry about being preyed on by one another. I worry about the safety of the individual. And the special housing unit and the way that they've been run professionally by DOCS and the people that work for DOCS for decades, it's a tool in the toolbox. We're going to take this tool, this important tool, away from them. Again, while we've been doing everything else, they're all mashing buttons trying to keep up with all the changes that we've been put on our criminal justice system. We've made their job only harder and harder in recent years, and now one behavioral tool that they have is going to be taken away from them. It's going to make the officers and the civilian staff less safe. It's going to make the population less safe. And I don't want to see us do something legislatively that is going to cause one more person to be assaulted or physically harmed in any of these facilities. If voting this bill down saves one life, then voting this bill down is be a good thing for us to do. I am and will be voting in the negative. Thank you, Madam President.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing and hearing none, the debate is closed. The secretary will ring the bell. Read the last section.
Section 14, this act shall take effect 1 year after the shall become a law.
Call the roll.
Addabbo, Gianaris, Kruger, Ork, Stewart, Cousins, White.
Senator Brooke to explain her vote.
Thank you, Madam President. I won't take long today. I just wanted to share my experience hearing one of the stories of an individual who had been held in solitary confinement. Because I think that it's important when we are talking about this issue to remember we're talking about people and we're talking about their lives. We're talking about people like Layleen Polacco and Khalif Browder, Ben Van Zandt and Dante Taylor who have lost their lives. And we're talking about the people who are living every single day, sometimes silently struggling from the mental health challenges that they have from being put away in solitary confinement. This is the morally right thing to do, and I'm so proud of some of my colleagues, the organizers, the survivors, the advocates, and Senate leadership for pushing this forward. The United Nations believes that the actions we take against these folks who are incarcerated in solitary confinement are wrong. And finally, New York State is stepping up to say that we are taking the moral high ground and we will save lives with this bill. And for those reasons, I'm incredibly proud to join my colleagues in voting aye on this bill. Thank you.
Senator Brooke to be recorded in the affirmative. Senator Gianaris to explain his vote.
Thank you, Madam President. We fancy ourselves a civilized society, and in New York we like to think we set the tone for a lot of the other states, and yet we continue to cling on to medieval forms of punishment that have been deemed, as you heard through the course of this debate, to be nothing less than torture by authorities such as the United Nations and many others. I heard one of my colleagues just say that if rejecting this bill will save even one life of the general population, then it's worth it. The entire point of this bill is that it will save lives of people in the general population. There are many instances where those who have suffered through solitary confinement have taken their own lives or suffered other physical and mental anguish as a result. And let's be clear, there are other ways to achieve the goals of maintaining order without subjecting someone to this kind of inhumane process. And so I'm proud today to stand with the countless families that have been affected and suffered through the use of this process. And I want to thank the sponsor of the bill, Senator Salazar, for her leadership and command of this issue, not just today during the course of the debate, but over the last several months as we shepherded this important bill through the process. But I'm incredibly proud to be voting in favor of this bill today. It's going to make a real difference, and it's going to give us a New York we can be slightly more proud of than was the case before its enactment. I vote in the affirmative. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Gianaris to be recorded in the affirmative. Senator Akshar to explain his vote.
Madam President, thank you. I just heard the word torture. What a mischaracterization. If it were torture, then why would we allow it to take place for a period of 20 days? If we truly believed that using a special housing unit was torture, why would we allow that to happen for 20 days? I said to the sponsor, yes, we should rehabilitate. Yes, we should have a very strong reentry program. Yes, we should reduce recidivism. But we have a responsibility in this body to protect and ensure the safety and security of the facility, of every inmate that finds themselves incarcerated. And equally as important, we have a responsibility as a body to ensure that we are protecting the hardworking men and women that work in these facilities. I heard that the acting commissioner has not endorsed the bill or has not opined. That's not a big surprise. But I can tell you who has spoken very loudly and very clearly. The hardworking men and women of NYSCOBA, of PEF, of Council 82, they know this is bad. They know that this is going to endanger not only themselves, but also the people that they are charged with protecting. There are only 1,600 people currently in a special housing unit, less than 1% of the prison population, but yet we will spend tens of millions of dollars to change our course. I listened with great intent to the sponsor's interview the other day on Capitol Press Room. She said that these regulations have been tried and solitary confinement has increased over the last couple of years. These regulations are less than 3 months old. We've not even given them an opportunity to work or to be tried. So, Madam President, today, even though I am in favor of all of the things that I said during the outset, I'm going to stand on the side of common sense. I'm going to stand on the side of ensuring the safety and security of prison systems, correctional facilities, and I'm going to stand on the side of the hardworking men and women of those organizations that I mentioned and vote no. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Akshar to be recorded in the negative. Senator Martucci to explain his vote.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to explain my vote. I'll be voting no today for two simple reasons. First, this legislation is going to give an automatic out, a pass, to prisoners of certain ages, and in the case I'm going to talk about, prisoners over 55, preventing the ability to use a special housing unit. Let's talk about some of the people that are going to catch a break from this legislation. David Berkowitz, the infamous son of Sam killer, who's in prison here in the state of New York, over 55. Mark David Chapman, John Lennon's murderer. Colin Ferguson, a man who in cold blood murdered 6 and wounded 19 on the Long Island Railway. And Joel Rifkin, who murdered 9 women and is suspected to have killed 17 more. Those are just a few of the people who are going to catch an automatic break that I just can't support. In preparation for coming here today, a little over 12 hours ago, I visited for the very first time a special housing unit. Traveled all the way back to my district to visit a jail. And there what I found was an impeccably clean jail. I found a jail that was well lit and bright. And I even went into one of these special housing unit cells myself. But what I also found there were hardworking union members, NYSCOBA, PEF, Council 82, CSEA, and many others. And what I found out is that these members have been waiting for a raise that they were due last year, over a year. I asked this majority to focus on an important piece for these workers, which is delivering them the raise that they're due. I wish we were in such a rush to take care of these hardworking union members, these hardworking New Yorkers, as we are to pass this bill today. So for the reasons that I've outlined and the reasons many of my colleagues have outlined, I'll be voting in the negative, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Senator Martucci to be recorded in the negative. Senator Rivera to explain his vote.
Thank you, Madam President. Solitary confinement is torture. I'm not the only one to say it. Some of my colleagues have said it. My colleague, Senator Salazar, went deep into this, and we have read much on the subject. In particular, there's one person that I'd want to underline here that is the reason why I'm on this floor today, to proudly vote in the affirmative on this piece of legislation. His name is Kalief Browder. I should say his name was Kalief Browder. I've talked about him on this floor before. A constituent of mine who at 16 was arrested and charged with stealing a backpack. He spent 3 years at Rikers Island, and 2 of those in solitary confinement. Maybe they called it a shoe, or maybe they called it another name. But ultimately what that led to was that after he was let out, while not being charged with anything because he had never stolen anything, he then committed suicide in my district, in the home where he lived in with his mother. And he did that because of how much he had been harmed by this practice that has been abused in this system for way too long. As my colleague, Senator Gianaris, said, there are other ways to maintain discipline in a facility. These folks, the folks who are incarcerated, are people as well. And unlike what some of my colleagues have tried to make us think, not every single one of them is a predator straight out of a 1990s horror flick. The majority of them are going to come back to our communities. The majority of them are there for nonviolent crimes. And many of them have to spend hours, days, weeks, sometimes months, without any real connection to other people. That harms them, and that harms us, which is why we need to move in a different direction, and I'm incredibly proud to vote in the affirmative on this piece of legislation for Kalief and for every other person that has found themselves in this situation. Thank you to the sponsor for bringing this to the floor. Thank you for our leader for bringing it here. I vote in the affirmative. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Rivera to be recorded in the affirmative. Senator Salazar to explain her vote.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to begin by thanking our Majority Leader, Senator Stewart Cousins, for her support in allowing me to carry the HALT solitary confinement bill, or as Assemblyman Aubrey has aptly said, in passing the baton to me, since this bill precedes my time in the Senate. I want to quickly address something that was just said, and note that the settlement from NYCLU was actually beginning to be implemented, the provisions of the settlement, years ago. It has not been only a matter of months, but it has been years since some of these regulations have been in place. I also want to add, on the subject of safety, that not only would this bill, as Senator Gianaris mentioned, save lives of people who are incarcerated, but it will do so without compromising anyone else's safety. There is no evidence to support the claim that solitary confinement increases safety, or that its absence would increase violence within prisons. Colorado, for example, decreased its use of solitary confinement by 85%, and prisoner assaults on staff are now the lowest that they have been since 2006. Colorado actually implemented a 15-day limit on solitary, dropped the number of people who are held in solitary, and they saw violence in their facilities decline by 40%. Corrections staff who initially opposed the changes there now support them. People across our state who have survived solitary confinement and families who have lost their loved ones to the lasting harms of solitary have testified for years to the urgency of ending the use of solitary confinement in our state. Today, I'm thinking of Ben Van Zandt. Ben was 17 years old when he was sent to Fishkill Correctional Facility. During his incarceration at Fishkill, Ben was sexually assaulted, beaten, and continually harassed. He was retaliated against. He was not always given the antipsychotic medication that he was prescribed. Ben spent long stretches of time in solitary confinement where his mental health deteriorated into severe depression and suicidal thoughts. In July of 2014, an OMH evaluation at Fishkill said that Ben was mentally unstable and vulnerable. But docs placed Ben in solitary confinement despite his well-documented mental illness. And later that same year, Ben was driven to take his own life in the isolation of his cell. He was only 21 years old. I'm also, as Senator Rivera mentioned, thinking of Kalief Browder today. Kalief Browder was 16 years old when he was placed in pretrial detention in Rikers Island after being charged for stealing a backpack. In the time that Kalief spent in New York City's Rikers Island facility awaiting trial as a legally innocent person, he spent nearly 2 years in solitary confinement, 700 days. Ultimately, Kalief's charge was dropped. He was never convicted. But the negative impact of solitary confinement on Kalief's mental health persisted and ultimately drove him to suicide. Today, I'm thinking about Layleen Polanco. While being held in pretrial detention at Rikers, the New York City Department of Correction knew about Layleen's medical condition, that she had epilepsy. But she was placed in solitary against the recommendation of medical professionals. Layleen suffered an epileptic seizure and died alone in solitary confinement. She was 27 years old. It is abundantly clear that the use of solitary confinement has exacerbated mental illness. It has caused illness where it didn't previously exist. Reducing the use of solitary confinement has been consistent with dramatic decreases in violence in correctional facilities. We know that reducing the use of solitary confinement will in turn reduce recidivism, and it will make correctional facilities and our communities safer. Dostoevsky once said, "The degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons." Solitary confinement in our carceral system has not only caused sickness in individuals, it has also made our society sick. But in passing this bill today, we are taking a necessary step to begin to heal. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Salazar, to be recorded in the affirmative. Announce the results.
In relation to calendar 555, those senators voted in the negative are Senators Akshar, Borrello, Boyle, Gallivan, Griffo, Helming, Jordan, Lanza, Mannion, Martucci, Matera, Oberacker, O'Mara, Ort, Palumbo, Rath, Ritchie, Sereno, Steck, Tedisco, and White. Ayes 42, nays 21.
The bill is passed. Senator Gianaris, that completes the reading of the controversial calendar.
Is there any further business at the desk?
There is no further business at the desk.
Move to adjourn until Monday, March 22nd at 3 p.m., intervening days being legislative days.
On motion, the Senate stands adjourned until Monday, March 22nd at 3 p.m., intervening days being legislative days.